Thanks, Ruby. And hi, everyone. Welcome to this final session of the day at the OASPA conference. And we're focusing on equity and sustainability in Diamond Open Access Publishing. My name's Lucy Barnes, and I'm an editor and outreach coordinator at Open Book Publishers, which is a scholar-led, non-profit open access press based in the UK. And thank you as well, before I begin, to OASPA and to the conference support team, especially Bernie, to the audience for attending and giving us your time and your attention, to the speakers for your contributions, and also to the translating team. So today, one of our speakers will be participating in Portuguese. And so as a result, we have translation support, which OASPA have arranged for us. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom window, you should see a globe icon there. And you can click on that globe icon. And if you want to listen in English and hear the Portuguese translated, then click on the English. If you want to listen in Portuguese and to hear the English translated, then click on Portuguese. And if you're in the fortunate position of understanding both languages, then you can also choose no translation and just listen to us live. So just to introduce the panel a little bit and what we wanted to talk about today, we're going to be speaking about equity and sustainability in Diamond OA publishing. And Diamond is a topic that came up quite a lot in yesterday's opening panel. And as we were thinking about Diamond OA ourselves in preparation for this event today, we were discussing, is there even an agreed single definition for Diamond Open Access? In the prep meeting, we agreed on no open access fees are charged to authors and no paywalls for readers, and that's Diamond OA as we understand it. But of course, there are different ways of achieving this. There's some suggestion that in journals, Diamond OA more typically means no regular income streams of any kind, but instead a journal supported by an institution perhaps, or run via donated labour, perhaps supported by the occasional grant. In the book world, we're seeing models describing themselves as Diamond because they don't charge authors, but instead use mixed funding models, including collective programmes, whereby many libraries will pay a small amount to support the open access activities of the press as a whole. And Open Book Publishers, who I work for, describe ourselves as Diamond and run ourselves in that way. And indeed, in both the journal and the book world, we're also seeing the rise of models like Subscribe to Open, whereby libraries will subscribe to closed content on the understanding that content may later be opened using those subscription funds if certain targets are met. So these models all achieve open access without charges to authors or readers in different ways, with different advantages and disadvantages. And we wanted to explore some of these approaches to Diamond Open Access, looking at how it works in different contexts. So looking at it in journal and in book publishing, looking at different organisations in different parts of the world with different models. We wanted to explore themes of equity and sustainability and thinking about the challenges that are involved in employing these models, and how sometimes collective action can be used to help to support them. And with input from the audience as well, we hope we'll engage in a rich and an honest conversation about how Diamond Open Access is working, and maybe in some cases struggling to work today. So I'll introduce the speakers, and then I'll just briefly explain the structure of the session before we launch into the discussions. So we have Sharla Lair today, who's the Senior Strategist of Open Access and Scholarly Communication Initiatives at Lyrasis. Since 2015, Sharla's role at Lyrasis has been to advance innovative content licensing and open scholarship. And her curiosity about what dynamics might advance open science drives her passion in community building, in sustainable funding infrastructures, in Diamond Open Access capacity building, collective impact models, and finding measures of meaningful impact. Amanda Ramalho is a member of the coordination of the SciELO and FAP ESP programme and coordinator of SciELO Books, where she's responsible for managing digital publications and interoperability of metadata and full texts for national and international indexing bases. And she currently works in the strategic and operational development of the collection, promoting and encouraging the publication of electronic books, metadata indexing, and the adoption of open access. Caroline Edwards is Senior Lecturer in Contemporary Literature and Culture at Birkbeck, University of London, and Executive Director of the Open Library of Humanities, which is an award-winning Diamond OA publisher which launched in 2015. Caroline has recently joined the Board of Directors for OASPA, so look out for her, and is expanding the Open Library of the Humanities team, as well as leading the growth of the OLH's sustainable publishing platform, Janeway, which is open source. Judith Fathallah is a Research and Outreach Associate at Lancaster University and Research Fellow at Coventry. She's worked with COPIM on the creation and launch of the Open Book Collective, which is a not-for-profit organisation that brings open access book publishers, infrastructures and libraries from all across the world together to support open access book publishing, which moves away from book processing charges. And she's worked on communal forms of governance for COPIM as well. And finally, Rod Cookson runs IWA Publishing, which is one of the first learned society publishers to completely transition its journals to open access. He's a director of OASPA, a council member of the Society Publishers Coalition, a member of the Royal Society's Publishing Board, and has served as director of ALPSP. Before joining IWA Publishing, Rod oversaw the medical, life science, and environmental journal portfolios at Taylor and Francis for 10 years, and he's worked at Blackwell Publishing, Reed Education, and York Press. So since we wanted to bring different organisations together to share their experiences and discuss common issues in today's panel, we want to maximise the time for discussion and exchange. So I'm being quite brutal in saying that each speaker gets 5 minutes each to summarise their model and the way in which it supports a Diamond open access approach. So we're going to hear from Sharla, Amanda, Caroline, Judith, and then Rod. And then we're going to have 20 minutes of moderated discussion, which I'll moderate, and we'll try and dig into some themes around this topic. And then we'll have 20 minutes for audience questions. So please do put any questions that you have in the question box on Zoom, and I will pick those up and present them to the panelists for their responses. So without any further ado from me, I'll invite Sharla to begin.
Hello, I am Sharla Lair, Senior Strategist of Open Access and Scholarly Communication Initiatives from Lyrasis, which is a nonprofit membership organization based in the United States. In 2020, Lyrasis launched the Open Access Community Investment Program, or OACIP. OACIP is a community-driven framework that enables multiple stakeholders to evaluate and collectively fund Diamond Open Access journals. It was at the 2020 OASPA conference where I did my first presentation about OACIP, and so I'm particularly honored to speak about it to the OASPA community again today. There are several components to OACIP. It provides a hub for Diamond Open Access journals published by university presses, library publishers, and nonprofit independent publishers, such as societies or scholar-led initiatives. The OACIP criteria form, completed by each participating journal, provides potential funders with useful information about the publications and publishers. This enables investors to make principled spending decisions and strategically fund programs that align with their missions. Investments in OACIP support the costs of labor, infrastructure, contingency, and innovation of each participating journal, and does so through 5-year commitments, allowing the journals to focus on publishing rather than continually trying to find money to keep the lights on. Supporters can fund individual journals, fund the entire OACIP portfolio, or contribute to the OACIP General Fund, which are funds used to fill funding gaps at the end of the campaign. Supporters can pay the 5-year commitments upfront or annually. This flexibility enables an array of communities to share the costs of funding these journals at rates lower than the average APC. OACIP has successfully coordinated 2 rounds of funding and is currently in the middle of its 3rd campaign. As you can see on this slide, in the first 2 rounds, OACIP fully funded 5 Diamond OA journals. In the 3rd and current round, we are trying to fully fund 6 journals. I am so grateful for all of the institutions that have already committed funds this round. We have successfully funded 1 journal so far. If your organization is seeking opportunities to invest in non-APC open journal initiatives, please consider participating in OACIP today. You are invited to reach out to me if you have any questions. OACIP has come far in a very short period. Since OACIP launched, 75 organizations have supported specific journals or the OACIP General Fund. Several organizations support more than 1 journal. These 75 organizations include 3 academic departments, 4 library consortia representing 104 academic libraries, 66 individual academic libraries, a national research center, and a museum. In total, this OACIP funding community is made up of 175 individual organizations that have collectively committed over $1.35 million to support these 11 journals for 5 years. And my hope is that with your help, by either participating or spreading the word, that this will grow to 1.75 million by the end of this year as we finish out the current campaign. This is the OACIP funding community. One of the biggest surprises for me has been the international reach. As you saw in the previous slide, OACIP supporters now have expanded into 5 countries outside of the United States. Although we just extended into our 6th country today, this morning, so welcome the Netherlands. But this reach is extending beyond just financial support. We are witnessing the significant impact that a very small program can have on the scholarly communication ecosystem. Scholars around the world who are associated with these journals are reaching out to their own academic departments or academic libraries and having conversations about sustainably supporting Diamond Open Access. It is a huge honor that the steering committee of the Budapest Open Access Initiative in their recent 20th anniversary recommendations recognized and specifically cited OACIP as a program for the global library and funding agency communities to support. And because of its early success, albeit very small scale, many in the ecosystem see OACIP's potential to scale and serve a much larger volume of OA Diamond journals if it is interconnected to a broader network of similar programs. Because of this, OACIP is being invited into international conversations about building a global federated funding infrastructure to sustain not just existing OA Diamond journals, but also to support those seeking a way to transition from a paywalled model to an open one. The OACIP journey thus far has been an impactful one, always reminding me that meaningful change does not require radical change. We can move in baby steps and still be effective when we move together. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sharla. And now I'd like to invite Amanda to speak for us.
Well, I would like to start by thanking for the invitation. It's an honor to be part of this conference and learn so much from all of you. I've prepared some slides just to guide you visually for you to understand about our publication method for SciELO books. I'm calling it about SciELO. It's a special program that supports communication infrastructure of open science research. It's also part of our open access pilot at FAPESP. It's the agency of research in the state of São Paulo. SciELO was launched in 1998, and it's been expanded to Brazil and also Latin America. And this has served as an inspiration to the launch in 2012. In addition to that, we have also checked the database of SciELO, where we saw most of the citations of articles and citations were for books and chapters. When we started developing the project, there was a whole context that guided our function and services that led us to the publications. Publications that were predominantly designed for printed format. There were no structured metadata management. We had low indexing of books in our database, and there was lack of scientific content in digital book platforms. So SciELO Books became a program for promoting the traditional publication of books that were already existent to ebooks in open access. And the proposal was to have a community-based model aligned with the conditions of our university publishing houses that operate as not-for-profit, but of course sell books so that they can maintain their own sustainability. The movement of open book access for SciELO is part of two sides. It's a public program funded by public funds, but there is also a contribution of the publishing houses. The development and launch was led through a consortia of 3 university publishing houses, Fiocruz, Unesp, and EDUFPA, all supported by the Brazilian Association of University Publishing Houses. and it was operated as a special project of our program SciELO, which is part of a self-sustainable cooperative of Brazilian and international publishing houses of scholarly books. The governance system relies on two committees that support and supervise the development and all of our operations. We have a steering committee who is responsible for political management, setting the lines of action and future strategies of the collection. In turn, the advisory committee is the scientific body responsible for evaluating publishers, books, and applying the indexing criteria. Both are formed by members of the founding publishing houses, members of the associations, and of SciELO. Our sustainability model requires initial investment of $250 per book by the publishing house, and it's paid once, and it covers the whole process of producing EPUB for standardization of metadata, assigning single identifiers such as ISBN, DOI, and the distribution to database and ebook stores. In 80% of cases, this amount is funded by the publishing house or the organization to which it's correlated. For open access books, this investment is made by the publishing house by the digital version of the book. And there are two possibilities of open access. The publishing house just provides the digital version of the book with no printed version, or the publishing house provides the digital version of the book in open access, but still sells the printed version. For commercially books, the publishing house makes the investment, but all the revenues resulting from that are given to the publishing house until they get to the initial investment of $250. Once that amount is reached, SciELO and the publishing house share the proceeds from selling the books so that the platform may be sustained. Many publishing houses use this value as an investment, really, or a new investment for additional publishing of open access books. So in other words, commercial books, they end up funding the publication of those open access books. Today we have 22 university presses, 6 thematic collections. We have published more than 1,850 books, 63 of which are open access. Our expectation is to reach 100% of open access books, but it depends on progressive income of additional resources. In 11 years, we have already had downloads in 70 countries, even though books published primarily in Portuguese and Spanish. In 2021, we were acknowledged as a reliable platform at DOAB. We've recently joined the COPIM Committee to discuss about open models for open access publication, and we are currently in contact with the TOTH Open Metadata team to think about additional collaboration and expand visibility of metadata for books and chapters. Future challenges are financial maintenance to improve the publishing platform. We want to keep on adopting digital as the main means of open access publishing. We want to expand the coverage of books in Latin America and enable the creation of a new database of books to enable new studies. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Amanda. That was great. And I think one of the points to draw from that is that obviously with books, it's possible still to make revenue from sales, even as the book is also open access. And this may be a point of difference with Diamond Journal models. So next speaker is Caroline. Caroline, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Let me just get my slides going and play from the start. So I'm Dr. Caroline Edwards, and I'm Executive Director of the Open Library of Humanities. We launched the Open Library of Humanities back in 2013, 10 years ago, and it wasn't called Diamond Open Access back then, to my recollection. It was mainly Gold Open Access, and we were explicit when we launched the project that we were going to be launching without article processing charges, because myself and my co-founder, Professor Martin Eve, who is well known among the open access community, We're both humanities scholars. We're both literature scholars based in the UK, and literature scholars don't have very much funding. So we were very keenly aware of what we considered to be the unsustainability of article processing charges for our disciplines. We launched the publisher. So we launched as a project in 2013, and then 8 years ago in 2015, we launched with 7 journals on our platform with funding from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. And our first task and challenge really was to try and build up an international reputation and to establish prestige. At the time in the UK, open access was a source of kind of controversial debate from the scholarly point of view, although librarians had been advocating for it vociferously for some time. And for reasons to do with the political climate in the UK at the time and the mandates coming from the government, and then via the Research Excellence Framework, national assessment exercise, a lot of academics were very skeptical in the humanities subjects, and some were actively hostile to open access. So it was quite turbulent and difficult for us to launch. And so we decided to position ourselves as a scholar-led and not-for-profit academic publisher. We both worked at Birkbeck University of London as academics, and subsequently the OLH, which had been a charity under UK law, was moved into Birkbeck University of London, which is our current home. So as I mentioned, we tried to focus our efforts on contacting our networks of scholarly collaborators and colleagues in the humanities fields. And this was a really important part of persuading at least certain sections of the community that open access publishing was legitimate, it could be prestigious, it would count in their promotional criteria for tenure track and things like that, that it could look as slick and professional as subscription models had in the past. We had to design a collaborative funding model from scratch, and like others that we've heard about, perhaps Open Book Publishers is quite similar. We launched what we called a library partnership subsidy, an LPS, and that is a membership organisation of currently more than 350 libraries worldwide who all contribute small amounts of money to sustain and fund our all of our publishing activities going forwards. So that has obviously taken some years to build. We've been building that network for sort of 8 years now. And in 2017, we began subsidizing some of that funding with our own income stream from our platform. So although we had to launch with a third-party provider because that was necessary to actually get off the ground with our journals, we weren't entirely happy with not being in full control of our own infrastructure. So we started building our own publishing platform, which is called Janeway. Since 2018, Janeway has rapidly become one of the leading platforms of choice for open access publishing. There are more than 200 journals which are using the platform, and a growing number of clients, mainly university press clients and some other publishers, as well as individual journals and scholarly societies and associations, are now paying to use our hosted service. We built this infrastructure and then we licensed it under a copyleft license, AGL version 3, which is an open software license. And this was explicitly designed to protect Janeway for the future. As we have seen over the past few years, many other forms of publishing platforms and infrastructure have sooner or later been bought by larger commercial entities. And so we were quite political in our vision that this would remain scholar-led and scholar-governed for the future, with a governance structure perhaps similar to the one we just heard described about SciELO, where we have a series of boards who democratically decide the future direction of the organisation and of the platform. I'll just say 2 more things briefly before my time is up. One of the challenges from my point of view, especially on the editorial side, has been how do we flip journals from subscription to open access We run a competitive program, so we are expanding every year. We launched with 7 journals. We now have 31 journals as of spring next year with the journals that we're migrating right now. And it's been quite interesting to manage editors' expectations around the kind of professional service that they expect, having moved from a wealthy, well-funded commercial publishing organization to a not-for-profit author-led organization. So I found that targeted outreach is really crucial. You need to use your communities to try and access editorial networks and journals to persuade them to flip. And I just sort of typed up some questions that I thought might be relevant for the discussion if we have time to come back to them. These are the questions that I'm asking myself and the team are asking ourselves at OLH after 10 years. How do we grow and how do we scale up? How do we leverage word of mouth publicity for organizations that do not have large budgets for sales and marketing departments? What kind of balance do we want to strike between being a bit quirky and academic-led and then being professional and offering a professional service? How can we collaborate with other Diamond open access colleagues and organizations, which Sharla was mentioning is a crucial part of her work as well at OACIP? And then finally, how does open access and Diamond open access fit within a wider context? I'm very aware of the problems in higher education working in the UK right now, which is very politicized and in some form of endemic crisis and structural inequalities. So I position OLH as part of that same kind of broader struggle for academics to regain a certain amount of control over their own working conditions and the conditions of knowledge production. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Caroline. And I kind of want to steal those questions, ask them myself. Also, I think you made a good point at the beginning, which I should perhaps have addressed in my own introduction, this point about terminology and diamond and gold, because of course, you know, gold open access does not necessarily mean that there is a fee attached. It means open access via the publisher. And Diamond has grown up to try and differentiate from the number of presses that do charge APCs and BPCs. So I think that's an important point to make. Thank you. And now, Judith, would you like to go next?
Thank you. I will just also share my screen from beginning. So my name is Judith Fathallah. I work between Lancaster and Coventry University, but I'm here today in my role as one of the developers of the Open Book Collective. The Open Book Collective is a charity which has been established for certain aims and built on certain ethos. At a practical level, what we do is raise new revenue streams for publishers and service providers. By service providers, we mean those providers that provide the infrastructures that OA publication and distribution needs to operate, such as metadata providers. DOAB would be another example, in order for those publishers and service providers to move away from a reliance on book processing charges. We make it easier for librarians to subscribe to OA membership schemes via our consortium model. And more importantly, or as importantly, we are building a community. We also, as a charity, cannot be acquired for profit at a later date. And we are built on an ethos of open and community-led infrastructures. Here is a brief slide showing some of the publishers that are our publisher members. And there you can see some of the service providers that I just mentioned. I'm
sorry to interrupt, Judith. We can't see your slides, actually.
You can't see my slides?
No, I thought you were speaking without them, but...
Okay, just a second. Let me try something. How about now?
Ah, yes. So we've got a slide with Tote and OAPN and the DOAB on it.
All right. Well, you didn't miss that much, really. I just showed you the aims and ethos. And here are the logos of some of our publisher members and our service provider members. So, for example, if you wanted to explore more about one of our publisher members, you could take a look at this summary on our site, have a brief look at the indicative pricing, which is banded dependent on a similar structure to JISC. You could overview the bespoke packages that we have available for libraries to support. So it is a consortium funding model, similar to what you may have seen in venues like Opening the Future, but it's communal, and I'll talk a little bit in a second about why that's important. Our offer to publishers, I think, is very clear in that we enable them to move toward Diamond OA. One of our criteria for membership is that publishers must either be Diamond OA publishers or moving towards 75% of OA frontlist without charges. We simplify the workflow that many small publishers would not be able to manage themselves. Some of our publishers are very, very small. And we undertake outreach work on behalf of publishers and service providers to the global community. Equally important, I think, is our offer to libraries. We offer ease of comparison between bespoke or pre-selected packages for global and local relevance to institution. Prices, again, are based on a banding structure similar to JISC, so it depends on the size of the institution and their economic status. We provide, and we will come increasingly to provide a guarantee of quality of our publisher members. You can see we've done our due diligence in assessing things such as their peer review practices, and this is a lot easier and a simpler workflow for libraries than managing multiple membership programs with individual publishers. And finally, what we're offering is the ability to do more than simply invest in an OA publisher or an OA offering, but to invest in a fairer and more equitable OA landscape. And some of our librarian colleagues have written very persuasively on this. I'm thinking of Peter Barr, for instance, in UKSG, has written of the library as a benefactor for OA, which I think is really important. So that's me at 5 minutes, so I will cease to share.
Thanks very much, Judith. And finally, Rod, would you like to speak for us? Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. Absolutely, yeah. Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to join you today for this OASPA conference panel. My name is Rod Cookson. I'm the Managing Director of IWA Publishing. We publish 15 research journals and 25 books each year. All of our journals are open access, and 80% of our books are. We're a Learner Society publisher. IWA, the International Water Association, is a registered charity with 10,000 members worldwide who work to provide clean drinking water, safe sanitation, and flood management. I'm going to talk about our experience of equitable open access with Subscribe to Open. So one of the models that Lucy introduced at the beginning. In 2021, IWA Publishing made 10 journals open access with Subscribe to Open. Subscribe to Open, or S2O, is a model by which libraries agree to support subscription journals so that they can become open access with no fees for authors or paywalls for readers. S2O is a highly equitable form of open access. The only limitation on what is published is the peer review process. The S2O flip was a major decision for IWA, driven by an explicit desire to become open access and by being a global association with members in all countries. Our experience has been very good, and S2O has worked well for us. Since 2021, our S2O journals saved 5,071 articles, an open access form with CC BY licenses. So those articles will stay permanently open access for all time. Articles from our S2O journals have been downloaded more than 12 million times over that period, with usage rising everywhere, and with particularly fast usage growth in Asia, Africa, Middle East, and Latin America. We're pleased that both our authors and readers have become more diverse as a result of Subscribe to Open. In the latest impact factor calculation, for instance, 66% of the citations to our S2O journals came from researchers in the Global South, up from 54% 2 years before. This is IWA as an international society delivering on its mission. We're doing other things alongside Subscribe to Open, as we recognise that equity is a broader issue than just a business model question. In parallel with S2O, we're actively working to improve the representativeness of our journal editorial boards. Very, very simply, we want our editors to look like our authors. In 2020, the year before we did our S2O flip, 33% of our editors were from the Global South. That has now increased to 48%. And for the first time this year, we have more editors on our journals in Asia than we do in Europe. There's still work to do on the editorial team gender balance, and we are addressing that. Looking ahead, we believe that our publications should be three things. They should be open, they should be equitable, and they should be sustainable. We want to publish equitable open access journals this year, and we want to still be doing that in 20 years' time. S2O provides us with a mechanism for doing this. There is now a wider piece of work to do to make open access equitable and sustainable more generally, and Diamond Open Access initiatives are an excellent move in this direction. We're keen to work with libraries, funders, and other publishers to develop new models that can make open access publishing genuinely equitable and genuinely sustainable models for the future. Thanks. And that's my intro. Back to you, Lucy.
Thanks, Rod. And thank you for picking up on those terms in the title of the panel, equitable and sustainable. So we're going to have sort of about 20 minutes or so of moderated discussion now, and then we'll pick up on questions in the Q&A. And I see that we're already getting some great questions, so please do continue to add to those. But to pick up firstly on this point about equity, equity is one of those words that's being bandied around with increasing frequency around open access. And I feel like it's important to get specific about what it means. So I think we can take it as a given that the fact that authors are not charged in a diamond model advances equity because it's not imposing a financial barrier on authors' participation. But beyond that, I was wondering what the panelists could say about how their different models embed equity in what they're doing. And maybe we could have Sharla going first.
So Lyrasis is a membership organization, and so most of that means we serve the library community who are our members, and so equity is built in for them in the sense that there's tiered pricing, a lot of flexibility for when they can participate based on whatever their fiscal years are. And even if you'll ever look at the OACIP web page and you look at the individual journals and see the pricing, you'll notice it's recommended. There are libraries that pay more or less based on what they're able to do because they're all snowflakes. They all have their different levels of agency and how they can start transitioning the funds they steward to support open. But we also embed equity in trying to be as inclusive as possible of the publishers, the type of publishers that can participate. This program is largely to support those on the margins who don't have, big subscription agents and, those kinds of other embedded relationships within the legacy models of scholarly communication. And so being able to allow for scholar-led initiatives, university presses who have who need help amplifying the work that they do, as well as now some societies that have shown up, which has been interesting because it's allowing us to ask the question, can societies transition to a diamond model or be sustainable in that way? So we're very new. And trying to think, we're trying to be as inclusive and equitable as possible from the beginning in how we include those who wish to participate.
Thanks, Sharla. And Judith, I wonder if you could speak to that question as well.
Yes, actually, some of what I was going to say is rather echoes Sharla's points and ideas there, and that we also utilize as I say, a banding system to our library members. And the point of this consortium funding model is that it enables smaller, perhaps more niche, more diverse OA publishers to have a space and a feasible way of publishing Diamond OA. And another important thing, I think, is that we really want to think beyond the global dominance within academic publishing of the global north and the English language. And I'm a hypocrite because I'm speaking English right now, but we're working really hard to expand our outreach into a more diverse geographic context and to bring publishers from other continents on board. You see, we've got African Mind on board. We're doing some scoping work now with our Friends of Continental platform, also in Africa. And we also are setting up a development fund. Part of what a small percentage of the fees that we charge to our members, because the publisher members have fees as well, goes towards the collective development fund, which then publishers and initiatives can apply to, some of which will be ring-fenced for lower and middle income companies, in order to advance OA publishing projects. So I see this as a kind of redistribution, a kind of redistribution towards equity. Yeah, I think that covers what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Judith. And Rod, could you maybe touch a bit more on this question of equity?
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. Yep. So we like our S2O model because there are no APCs and no fees for authors, and there are no barriers to readership. So very equitable in that sense, and we're quite conscious of the benefit that brings to researchers, because we do have 4 APC journals, and those journals have waivers, Research for Life and EIFL waivers. So we try to make it easy for people in institutions with limited funds to publish in those journals, and we get a good response from authors who don't have the funding to pay for APCs. Equally, we do consistently get told that researchers don't like waiver policies. They don't like that aspect of APC journals, and it is off-putting. So we very much prefer S2O in the sense for everyone. There really are no barriers. So we think S2O is a very good step forward in that sense. I wouldn't pretend all of the equity questions have been solved and embedded in the model. We're interested to participate in the purchasing power parity paper, lots of Ps, that came out from Information Power and Coalition S this week, which has got suggestions for how you might move to a system where libraries in different countries, institutions in different countries pay amounts that are affordable for them at the simplest. I don't think that question is solved, but I think that's an important question. And again, I know there's a lot of sensitivity in universities outside Asia on those issues. And I'd echo Judith's point about language. I think language is very important. We do a better job ourselves of publishing non-English books than we do of journals. We do publish one journal entirely in Spanish. We'd like to be able to address that question. But I think that's a future bit of work. But for now, we're really pleased that with Subscribe to Open, we have a situation where researchers have no inhibitions. There is nothing to stop them participating. So we've made a big step forward in terms of equity there. And I'd say we're conscious that there are other challenges for the rest of us to solve together.
Thanks, Rod. And Amanda, how does SciELO embed equity in what it's doing? What does it mean to you?
Well, from our side, there are two main players towards that. On the one side, there are the publishing houses. As there is a payment, a fee required of publishing houses, not all publishing houses can be part of our SciELO because sometimes it's too much. It's too expensive for them to pay. Therefore, we work with these publishers, training them on how to produce digital files. And that's going to reduce costs, because the highest cost at SciELO is to produce the EPUB, is to produce the digital format per se. So we qualify them. We train publishers how to do it themselves so that we can reduce the amount that they would have to pay, and then they will be able to be indexed. Still, there are some publishers which cannot join us because of that. But with our knowledge of metadata and interoperability, we can always support them to do that themselves. In addition to that, there are the readers, those who are going to have access to the publications. So everyone wants to have accessible and open access books. But we not only do we encourage publishers to have digital format of publications, but we also want the publications and the different formats to be built, designed with the appropriate tags for accessibility. Publishers are ultimately responsible not only to really have the publication of researchers, the result of different research papers, but also think about the social aspect of that. There are some publishers located in regions where the local population has just one publishing house there. So they really have to think how they can bring information to their specific audiences.
Thanks, Amanda. And finally, Caroline, thank you for being patient.
That's okay. I'm going to divide my answer into 3 points. I'll summarize quickly if I can. The first is funding. So as we've heard with other responses, we have a tiered pricing structure for our library partners. And we've been working recently on building in a pricing calculator that derives data from the World Bank classifications, so that when a librarian comes from any part of the world, because most of our libraries currently are in the US, North America and Europe. So if they come from different parts of the Middle East or Southeast Asia, for example, they will be able to have a specifically FTE level of tiered pricing, but also based on that specific country and income in that country. So that's one thing that we've been doing. The second one is journal content, which I haven't heard perhaps as much about. And I think this relates to Rod's really important point about increasing coverage of the Global South in our scholarly publishing. So we proactively solicit and encourage and commission special collections of articles on our mega journal platform, Open Library Humanities Journal. So, for example, we've had some great collections on post-colonial scholars based over in the subcontinent of India, writing about game studies and theory, and open access makes an absolutely enormous difference to them, because most of their colleagues can't access the kinds of sort of top-level journals in their discipline if they're not open access. They just don't have the funds. So we proactively try and commission that work. We also proactively try and encourage journals to flip to our model who work with writers of colour. So one of the journal applications I'm working with at the moment, and this is a consideration that I don't think comes across so much in STEM subjects, is that writers of colour in the humanities are disproportionately disenfranchised. They are precarious. They don't have tenure. They don't even have stable jobs in the academy. And without income and payment, they can't publish. So unlike other scholars who we don't give payment to ordinarily to produce a journal article, we have to actually budget to pay them by the hour for them to be able to do that research and then produce a journal article. And so we have to work then with other charitable organizations, the Arts Council and other aid agencies who are able to divert funding to pay them to even produce the research in the first place before they get to the point of deciding where they're going to publish it. And I think that's a really important point to think about. Internally at the Open Library of Humanities, because I think equity also means, as Rod was suggesting, that we should make sure that our own organisations reflect some of the authors that we're publishing. We've hired 2 women of colour in a team that's 8 going up to 10 people. We're making sure that we have a better gender representation on our tech team. So we've got 2 women joining our tech team, which prior to that was 3 men, albeit lovely feminist men. But, you know, it's really important, and we have a very good gender balance at the organisation anyway. So internally, those things matter to us. And then those people's voices and input into our organisational direction matter. And then the final point, equity in terms of people, organisations, editors, authors who don't have enough sufficient access to funds, as we've heard about. Our platform is open source. Anybody can use it. Anybody can use it for free. It doesn't require a huge amount of tech knowledge or tech know-how because of the extensive documentation we have produced for people, and we're continually improving that documentation through user experience. And one of the most important things is extra tech features that we have, for example, a typesetting plugin. So if you're a tiny journal and you know, you set up on Janeway, which was modeled to some extent on the Open Journal Systems free software, you know, many years ago, which is now huge. They can use the plugin, so they could produce HTML and XML as well as PDF, and they wouldn't actually need to go to a typesetter, so it wouldn't incur any cost. So I think it's really important that we talk about tech development and keeping that open source, keeping that within the community, collaboratively finding ways to divert funding into the development of these digital infrastructures, and then copyleft licensing them to protect them for the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. There was a lot in that. And I think that point about, you know, supporting authors financially is an important and difficult one for open access publishing. So thanks for raising that one. So the next thing I wanted to ask has actually been picked up by quite a few questioners as well. So I think what I might do is read out some of the questions that relate to it, and we can address those. So I wanted to ask about the challenges involved in getting support for collective models like these, and this has been picked up by a number of different questioners. So somebody anonymous says, asking for funding from individual institutions demands plenty of resources, and that's without taking expansions such as new journal launches or new book collections into mind. And do you think Diamond Crowdfund OA is a sustainable and scalable route to OA, and why or why not? And similarly, we have a questioner that's Anne, who says, Diamond OA's strength and challenge is its reliance on community support. Do you have advice for librarians like myself when it comes to convincing our institutions that community support must come with a structural budget? And we also have, I think, another question that I saw on a similar lines. Diamond OA as a term carries the connotation that no one pays, which is generally not a sustainable or at best a highly precarious and volatile situation. The initiatives discussed today all depend on organised collective action. Do you think that does enough to balance precarity compared to goal models of OA, and is it a viable approach generally? And that question's from Laura. I don't know who wants to tackle this question first. Maybe Judith?
Yeah. I have lots to say. Okay, so the way I see it, there's 2 aspects to this question. There's a pragmatic aspect and there's a kind of values-based idealistic aspect. So I'll speak on the pragmatics as it pertains to the Open Book Collective first. Right now, the work of reaching out to libraries and promoting the OBC is supported by several positions or aspects of several positions that the Open Book Futures project has won through grant funding, and that COPIM also won through grant funding. As part of my job, is part of the job of several other people, so we're also bringing on an engagement lead. After the life of OBF finishes, Open Book Futures project, our aim that we are on target for is for the Open Book Collective to be self-sustaining as a charity. So I hope that those positions that do that time-consuming work of outreach can continue to be supported. Now, with regard to the broader sustainability of this question, and yeah, it is a lot of labor and it is time consuming, but I mean, I hope that as time goes on, the Open Book Collective will come to be this kind of badge of quality, because we really believe in the publishers that we take on. We have very stringent membership criteria. So in a way, I think that labor will be lessened when it comes to convincing institutions. Right now, we're assisting librarians in quite pragmatic appeals to budget holders by demonstrating the ways in which our publishers meet the specific research and teaching needs of their institution. Like myself and the other outreach associates have compiled detailed reports for individual institutions. As time goes on, I hope that the need for that will be less. With regard to the broader sustainability, as opposed to golden open access, I sort of feel like we're not going to know unless we try. I mean, Joe DeVille, who is the lead developer of the OBC, often says that book processing charges represent a failure of imagination. They represent a failure to imagine the OA landscape differently. We haven't really tried when it comes to books. The OA landscape for books is new. We haven't yet tried to do it another way. So let's find out. We have this project, we're building our community, and will it be sustainable in the long term? I hope so. And right now, it looks as though we are going to get there. We are meeting our goals. So there are no guarantees, but it's exciting and it's promising. And if we don't invest in this, and we don't give libraries the opportunity to be benefactors to the OA landscape, we'll never know. And it will be back to this failure of imagination that Joe talks about.
Thanks, Judith. And maybe Rod could pick up on that as well. Yeah,
I was going to go back to the first of the several questions you asked, Lucy, which was sort of whether the difficulty of being in a library situation and looking ahead to can we make a contribution from our budget? Is that sustainable and scalable, and how do you set that internally? I very much like shared models, like the OA CIP model that Sharla described, where different libraries formally collaborate, and there's a degree of predictability brought into a contribution to something like Diamond Open Access, which I think is simpler from a budgetary perspective, and I think also simpler to show to an administrator perhaps what the benefit has been, because the collective action clearly makes individual journals Diamond Open Access, and I think that can be a very sustainable model. I'd say alongside that, I think it's perhaps a little bit of a shame the Coalition S have been very enthusiastic about Diamond Open Access, but not very keen to contribute funding towards Diamond Open Access. And I think this is probably one of these questions where the more we can bring stakeholders together and different parties together in formal ways like OACIP, with clear commitments to make specific journals or groups of journals open access on a Diamond model, I think the simpler it becomes for everyone to participate, and the simpler it becomes to keep those journals going in the long run. And I think if funders can contribute to that as well as libraries, I think everyone's life becomes a bit simpler. And I think those kind of practical questions and those kind of internal within an institution cells become simpler.
That's right. And Sharla, I think you wanted to speak to this question as well.
Yeah, I mean, Diamond is not new. It's been around and being very sustainable for other parts of the world for a long time. Now, money flows differently in those parts of the world. And so that's why OACIP is maybe different than OLH and is different than the Open Book Collective and all of the others, because where they form is usually trying to solve problems that are in their location first. right? Which gets interesting when you start talking about scholarship as international, you know, and should funding be as well? Never mind, you know, just the representation of the authors and the journals and disciplines and all of that. It sounds like it's mostly librarians that are asking these questions today. And I know it's hard because where we're seeing the innovation in OA business models is in publishers you've probably never supported before. So this is new money. And it's really hard, whether it's paywalled or open, to convince higher ups to add a new line to your budget. And it might take 2 or 3 years, so long as your budget stays somewhat stable, right? This is the problem librarians have had, no matter what kind of content it is. Where this is also not a new problem, we give a lot of money to big for-profit corporations, whether they're publishers, aggregators, ILS systems. We give a lot of money where a lot of that money is going somewhere outside of this ecosystem. And so there's that challenge as well, that we're giving more than enough to certain entities. And I want to see a rebalance, and it comes back to the libraries. Libraries have the power here to decide where they want their money to go. And what I want to say is, we want to give the money to Open Book Collective, and by the way, so-and-so for-profit corporation, we don't have enough money to give to you because we're going to give it to them instead. It's a shift in how we're looking at things. And then, yes, like Rod said, all stakeholders coming together to fill those gaps the way they have in the more legacy way of doing things, and shift those funds over to fill other gaps so that there is more bibliodiversity, so that there is, you know, a more even distribution of wealth that goes to support all disciplines, not just STEM. And you know, and trying to put the money where the gaps are first. So that's and how to talk about that. And that's one last thing is what Rod said, the collective. OACIP, I know OLH does this, I know Open Book Publishers does this. We list who these communities are. We get their permission, but they proudly want their names indicated that they supported these programs. So if you are worried about convincing others, you have peer institutions who are supporting this, those who are similar to you, even in other countries, who are there. So you're not doing this alone. And I encourage you to talk to each other about this and how that you are helping each other's money go further by doing this together.
Thanks, Sharla. And I was going to go to Caroline next because I don't want to leave you to last again. But if you'll forgive me, I want to pick up on that point that Sharla made about Diamond OA not being new, and to ask Amanda for her thoughts on this, because I think also when you were explaining, Amanda, the SciELO model, it was interesting that there was a mix of public funds and then the presses themselves contributing. So I think your thoughts about this sustainability question might be a little bit different. So would you like to speak to that a bit?
Yes, here, first of all, SciELO Books was launched about 11 years ago, in which funding, direct funding of organizations or funding organizations for book publishing was very difficult and was not acknowledged. We, in a partnership with the publishers, we had to think on a model that would be self-sustainable. This model clearly did not work in the initial years because the SciELO program had to put means for the project to continue. It began to be more self-sustainable after 10 years, in which we have more acknowledgement, more access, values, book values that are lower, promoted by the publishers. So this model began to work. We have tried to think about this model of collective funding for the whole platform, but there were barriers in relation to the rationale or to justify the origin of resources. Our executing organization made many questions, put some barriers for us to do so or to continue. But on the other hand, our culture is not one in which the libraries invest in projects or in books. So the libraries, they operate at a very low resources. They don't have funding for other books. So our source is either the author to ask the funding agency for the research for some finance for digital publishing, or the publisher asks its institution, or we submit a project, a specific project for publishing a book to make it feasible. Throughout the years, we saw that some of the commercial books that began to be sold much above the average, and these books reached a value that the publisher had invested in terms of publication. And when the publisher identified that, it immediately began to convert the commercial format to open format, because the book paid itself with sales. So this model has been adopted by many publishers who are able to have this kind of result. And that has been gratifying for us, because even though it's not an ideal model, it's a model that in our region, for the time being, is a little more aligned to financial aspects and operational aspects of each publisher.
Thanks, Amanda. And I think that point about, and Sharla made it as well, that different regions are trying to solve problems by seeing what works. I think that seems to be a theme that's coming out of what we're talking about. Caroline, thank you for waiting. Would you mind going next?
I mean, yeah, thank you. Just following on from Sharla's point, and also what Judith was saying earlier, I think this is where it gets political, and this is where librarians are amazing, the advocacy and the passion with which they defend their budgets and attempt to divert small amounts of money to new experimental projects is incredible. But if you can harness that with the academic researchers themselves, you have a much stronger formula. So I was interested by Judith saying that you research an institution and produce a report and present it to them and say this, your teaching could benefit if you support our model. We don't go quite that far, but we do actually use our journal editors and authors to approach their institutions. So we keep a big spreadsheet of everyone who's publishing in our journals. So it's hundreds, I forget exactly how many articles a year, more than 500 a year or something. And we make a note of their institution and we check against our membership scheme. And then we produce a template letter and we send it to the academic, and we politely ask them if they wouldn't mind sending it to the library director, and we give them the contact details of their library director, who they may not have had that much contact with before. And we've got a really good success rate of libraries then joining our scheme when it's demonstrated to them that your own authors are already publishing in our publications, and that's saving you APCs worth, I don't know, £5,000 or however many articles it is. So I really think maybe we need to move the conversation to think about the contract between librarians and academics. And my work on the academic side is, it's hard and it's a slog and it's frustrating. Academics don't come to these kinds of conferences. They don't come to open access talks unless, like myself and others here on this panel, they have an academic background and then they've gone into publishing. So we also have to spend a lot of effort doing outreach at all the subject specific conferences for all the disciplines. We have to be there on their turf, the way that the commercial publishers are in the book stands, right? At every big, for me, it's the MLA, Modern Languages Association North America, every big major event, all the publishers are there. And the open access community struggles to be represented and to be visible precisely because we don't have travel budgets and we don't have enough capacity. So I think one thing I'd also like us to perhaps think about as a community is how can we share information? For example, can we give each other information about who's going to which event? Can you take my poster? I'll take your poster. We could be really tactical, actually, if we harnessed a collective approach, and we could make sure that all of us are represented at different events, which would massively reduce the cost for travel and transport.
I'm trying to start an author network for arts and humanities researchers if I can get funding for it, because I'm an arts and humanities researcher. I've just, I have now moved into this open access publishing sphere, and I've realized how limited the understanding is amongst academics. So that's one thing that I want to do going forward, if I can get the funding, is to start a researcher network.
Thanks, Judith. Thanks, Caroline. So mindful of time, I'm going to be less democratic about inviting everyone to answer every question now, and that there are actually a couple in the panel that are addressed to individuals anyway. So there's a question there from Sarah about how concerned are subscribing libraries about publishing authors from their own institutions? Do they ask about it? Are they happy to fund external authors? And I think we were already kind of speaking to that question with some of those responses about demonstrating local value, and we appeal to libraries. And potentially that also speaks a bit to a comment that Annalise has made in the chat, with the point that researchers and authors drive the publishers they have to subscribe to and to support. I think it's about trying to bring together what publishers are doing with what authors want and need, and that helping librarians to make decisions about what they're investing in. But I don't know if anyone briefly wants to touch on this question about whether libraries, Sharla, whether the libraries push back against collective models.
Yeah, I think with this, we need to stop thinking about we've been forced to think of this in a very atomized way. We are looking at single articles, and a lot of this is driven by policymakers who give money to research that it has to be funneled through to the author of that research. And so we've created systems that support the author in that way. And that's great for individuals. However, it's not really doing very much good for the disciplines that they serve necessarily. So what I encourage libraries to do, and you already do this anyway, you're already organized with your liaison librarians, your subject librarians, you're looking at disciplines, because faculty come and go, but the departments are still there. Can we shift how we're thinking about this in supporting disciplines? And yeah, you might have an author who's supported, but are they using this content in the classroom, especially for books, but even journal articles? Is this something that's been course adopted? So it may not have anything to do with your author, with any of your own faculty, or that author happens to come to your university to work there. You will have already supported some of that, what they've done, that you are now benefiting from directly. It's too complex, I think, to start just looking at single authors. We need to think more broadly.
Thanks, Sharla. And then for Caroline, there's a question from Catherine. Could you talk a bit more about how equity plays into conversations with humanists about their discomfort with open access where that exists?
Sorry, let me just process that question because I can't read it. Equity.
So how does equity play into conversations that you're having with humanists about their discomfort with open access if they are uncomfortable with it?
How does equity play? Not enough. Yeah, not enough. I think, yeah, as Sharla was saying, the atomization of the way the money travels to support research based on author decisions. And I've seen Annalise Taylor comment in the chat as well about the researchers won't stand for us dropping subscriptions to particular publishers. I think too many academics in the humanities, in my experience, haven't, for various reasons, been able to engage fully with open access. They've perceived it, and obviously I have a UK focus in that I'm based here, but we do also, publish internationally and liaise with international colleagues. They feel kind of under attack. They feel that open access is often top down. It's about mandates. It's about research assessment exercises. And not to be forgotten that those things are very aggressively driven by the kinds of publishers who are making the largest profits in this system. So people like Elsevier have specialized in the entire research process and the auditing process, and they lobby particular research councils and governments to implement these frameworks, and then that is part of their business model. So this comes back to my earlier point, sorry to get a bit soapboxy, but this is why this problem of open access and sustainable, equitable diamond open access is inextricably connected to the problems in higher education. And right now, my colleagues are struggling to keep their jobs. We have mass redundancies across the UK in humanities departments, closures of English literature, creative writing, history departments, philosophy, cultural, media studies. Some of these are profit making, but they get closed anyway. So it's a very volatile landscape. And when I'm trying to engage with fellow humanities academics, I have to proceed with caution because they are sort of under attack from so many different angles. So to be honest with you, I think I'm going to lean more into the politics because I think that might be one way to win them over, because I think we've got to such a structural point that they are so angry with their employers and with their conditions of work that that might be something that we can actually leverage in the open access community.
Thanks, Caroline. And there's a question from Anonymous for Rod. Can Rod speak about how the IWA journal subscriber base has changed from before the switch to subscribe to open and after? Have your previous subscribers bought into S2O? Have you gained new subscribers who are motivated by supporting the model?
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. Thanks, Anonymous. In lots of ways, our subscriber base hasn't changed. I mean, it's a lot of the same customers who support us because we are in a particular discipline and their institutions active in that discipline, and that works for them. We did lose a small number of subscribers when we did the subscribe to open flip because we'd done the subscribe to open flip. I can think of one organization where the librarian wanted to support us, and there were lawyers in the organization who told the librarian, you can't pay money for something which is free, and they had some existential disagreement, and that was a cancellation. We had very few of those. I would say against that, we have had various institutions support us who weren't supporting us before because we did the flip, and some of those are, you know, very large, familiar universities in. I can think of some in North America, and some very institutions in North America and Europe. And some of them are also universities in China and other places who are happy to support what we're doing and weren't subscribing before. I would say we've had to learn new skills. So we've used something that Knowledge Unlatched developed called OASPA, and a similar solution developed by which allows us to see who high-use non-subscribing institutions are. We never knew who those people were before. So we can talk to those libraries and we can say, you know, you're downloading lots of articles, you're publishing articles with us, you're not supporting us, and have a conversation. And some of those conversations have brought new subscribers. But I think generally, we still a subscriber base. You know, we've got core institutions that are active in our area. And I think they've been happy to support us before and happier to support us after subscribe to open. And if I can be slightly cheeky and just join in on Annalise's comment, I think that's a totally sound comment. I guess the thing to add is, if we can make things like diamond approaches, subscribe to open approaches work, the way to have you know, not-for-profits and other organizations justifying your budget is to have them publishing the best research. And there is a circularity that if we support models that are good for researchers and disseminate research well, they will get the better research. And in the long run, will be the sensible choices for librarians to support, and the sort of way to get away from having your budget locked into you know, the claims put on it by 20 big publishers with impressive portfolios but very high price lists, is to help the community to publish the very best research and find solutions between us.
Thanks, Rod. And then there's a question for Sharla before we close. Has OAKIP funded journals in languages other than English? And if not, would you accept journals in other languages?
So all the journals so far are published in English. There is one that is exploring publishing at least the abstract of each article in multiple languages. And then there's another that, if they're funded well enough over the years, that they're going to start trying to publish in other languages. It's expensive to do translations. We know this. This is why it's, you know, AI. Hope maybe one day the large language models might be helpful in this, but there's so much nuance in the languages we speak that's difficult when we're truly trying to communicate. And so I'm open for OASCIP itself to support other journals that are published in other languages, but at the end, it's a matter of getting the funding. And so what I would like to see is that OASCIP works with other similar type programs around the world where we help amplify each other and help get money, from the United States to a journal in Brazil to be able to support it, and that it is published in Portuguese, right? It's what are ways that we can maybe work in new ways, because it's a matter of trying to support where the journal is being published and then making that visible to everyone. So I'm open to it. We do have a journal from the UK right now and one from India, although they both publish in English. And the more support we can give, like Rod was saying, the more journals in the world can pay for those translation services and provide it in all languages is what I'm hoping for one day.
Thanks, Sharla. And then the final question there, which is actually about the language translation, which I think is worth addressing because it was really helpful for us in this session. So we have a great translation team behind the scenes, somebody translating from English into Portuguese and somebody translating from Portuguese into English. And then Zoom enables different audio tracks. So if you tune into one or the other, you hear those translations. So it's a mix of tech wizardry and human skill. And a big thank you to the translators. So what this session has taught me above all is that we could have a conference all about Diamond OA, and possibly we should, because there's so much to discuss. But a huge thanks to our speakers, first and foremost, for their fantastic contributions. A huge thank you to OASPA and the conference support team and the translating team, as I've mentioned. Thank you to the audience for your attention and your questions and your comments in the chat. And this is the last session of day 2. So on behalf of OASPA, we'd like to thank you all for listening in today, and look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Lucy, for hosting so well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.